Sabona, Molo, Velkom, Dumelang, etc., etc. My name is Prof. Robin Kriegler, and this is Cast Chats Season 1, Episode 2. What is Cast Chats, you ask? Well, I have spent the last 10 years researching the history of South African humor and satire, and I have been fascinated by the resonances between folks that I talk to in the creative sphere and folks that I talk to in the academic sphere. Cast Chats is a project that's meant to bring those two spheres together and get us involved in a common conversation about this incredible region and the richness of the cultural and historic scene that we are all trying to engage with, reflect on, and preserve. So I'm so glad that you've decided to join me on this journey today. This is episode 2 of season 1, and we are talking to Ntobeko Ximba. So who is Ntobeko Ximba? Well, within 6 months of starting stand-up comedy at the iconic Armchair Theatre in Cape Town, Ntobeko was featuring at the Jive Cape Town Funny Festival, performing at the Cape Town Comedy Club of blessed memory, and even featuring at the Los Angeles Laugh Factory stage. Since then, he has starred in the Savannah Newcomers Comedy Showcase on DSTV and toured the country with the Proudly Problematic Tour, including the National Arts Festival for the past 2 years. His close friends describe him as such a funny dude, and I couldn't agree more. So without further ado, let's get to the show and my talk with Ntobeko Ximba.
Recording in progress, if my accent is.
Well, welcome, Ntobeko. I am very, very excited for our conversation this morning. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm fantastic. Thank you for having me. I went to school in Durban and I came to Cape Town to study, and I studied at AAA School of Advertising. And that's like my primary kind of, that's what pays my rent is my advertising job. I'm a creative director in advertising. And yeah, that was a lot quicker than I thought it was going to be. But essentially, that's pretty much it. The interesting story about that though is I was at youth, like Fridays youth, like at church, and
Mm-hmm.
my youth pastor, his sister lived in Cape Town, and I was in like a very last minute like situation where I was kind of I was accepted into college, but I had nowhere to stay. I had no like prospects. I had no like, and no one like, I didn't have money to pay for a place. So, my youth pastor said, "My sister lives in Cape Town. Why don't you stay with her?" And basically, probably had an awkward phone call with her, like, "Listen, there's a kid here." Um, and I stayed with them for like with her family for like a year almost, in Cape Town, and kind of got acquainted and learned the whole place. It was culturally quite different because I'll tell you, in Durban is a very Zulu city. Okay, it's KwaZulu Natal, and I'm Zulu. I can speak Zulu anywhere in Durban. Cape Town is a lot more Afrikaans. I didn't know that as many people spoke Afrikaans in the world than in Cape Town. Like people assume because I'm like brown skin, dark skin, people assume that I speak Afrikaans because colored people in Cape Town speak Afrikaans. And I didn't know colored people in Durban don't speak Afrikaans. It
Mm-hmm.
would be it would be ridiculous to speak Afrikaans to a colored person in Durban. But in Cape Town, everyone just assumed that I spoke Afrikaans. So there was a big culture shift. And also Triple A is a little bit of a kind of a Lani private school.
Mm.
And I came from public school. And culturally that was really different because all the kids in my class kind of, it felt like I was going to school with like the rich kids, and I don't know, like I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what an iPod looked like. Giving away my age. That's the year that like iPhones were just coming out and iPods were still a thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was culturally like all of those things I think were quite wild.
Yeah. And did you do, so I'm also interested, obviously, in sort of your origin story in comedy, because a lot of comedians, are in advertising and stuff for their day job in sort of a similar position.
Yeah.
Some people come from like a theater background, and I don't know if that was true for you. Like if you had done that in school as you were like in, high school and stuff. How
I
did you
did.
first? sort of gravitate towards stuff like that?
Yeah, so I've what happened was in grade 11, which is grade 11, grade 12, end of school. Grade 11, I was part of, I did a random audition that I saw in the paper for for the KwaZulu-Natal like regional kind of big play that happens once a year for, excuse me, high school students, and it's like semi-professional. It's at a big theater and stuff. I auditioned, I got in. We did Fiddler on the Roof. I had probably some of the best time of my life. Like, when like you come alive, in a thing like that. I was like, oh, before then I wanted to become a doctor. And then I was like, nah, I can sing and dance and play around on stage, and theater people are the best. They just like everyone, like imagine all your friends know how to sing and they just like happy, and it's like it's everything's kind of cool. It's like theater kids. Um so I got that experience like late in high school, and I was like, oh yeah, I want to be in theater. I couldn't there's no there's no there's no financial stability in theater.
Mm-mm.
So and I come from a family where financial stability is important because we don't have it. So you can't just be like, if you're any kind of smart, you have to go into a career. So I managed to convince my parents to, at least let me study advertising. But I mean, no one is gonna let me study theater. Um, and I'd already seen the course actually that I wanted to study, but it was like, that's even if by some miracle I get a bursary, I do it and then I finish and I'm like, there's no.
Yeah.
So that was kind of originally the bug for me. I knew that the theater kind of world is magic, and I've always loved it. And it was just maybe it was for the privileged. It wasn't for me. Origin in terms of starting comedy, that was like a lot later. I was kind of pretty well established in my career already, and a friend of mine who's also like is a jeweler, Joel. He I don't know. We were having dinner at my place the one time, and he was like, we were talking about like being funny and like, because I mean, we consider ourselves funny people, just like, in general conversations,
Mm.
whatever. And he was like, "Are you, oh, I'm funnier than you." I don't know how it got to like, guys hang around. It got to, I'm funnier than you. And I was like, I'm funnier than you. No, I'm funnier. Well, let's put it to the test. We'll have a comedy off. We'll have a funny off. And we did it at my flat, actually. We had a few friends over, and I mean, it was terrible. It was really bad, but
Mm.
it was funny. And then I think it inspired him to to try it out, like for real. And so he went and tried it out. And the next week he was like, "So I tried it out, and it seems like you can ask to just do 5 minutes over here and do 5 minutes or whatever." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll try it out too." And I mean, before then, I've always been a fan of stand-up comedy. I never dreamed that I could possibly do it. Like it looks like magic. Like you talk and people laugh. It's ridiculous. So I did it as well, and then people laughed, and I guess
Mm.
the rest is still medium to long-term history.
Yeah. So, and when would have that been?
About 6 years ago. I'm trying to remember the year now. It was 2018 because it was a year before the year before COVID. I had a fun ex so what happens sometimes in comedy is that if you're a nobody and somebody more important than you comes along that night, you can just get bumped, and so you're nervous the whole time waiting for your spot, and then your spot
Mhm.
never comes. So the night I was gonna start my first like night in comedy, I was gonna start. Somebody came, and it was at like a dingy restaurant called Nomad that a lot of comics started at.
Mhm.
So I was gonna start there, and Gino Fernandez kind of gave me a spot, and then Nick Rabinovitz came through, and so I was nervous the whole
Mhm.
like night, and then Nick Rabinovitz comes through, does it, and then Gino's like, "Ah, that's all, folks. Thank you very much." And I was like, "Oh, I don't get to go on." So I didn't get to go on. And then I spoke to Gino. I was like, "Oh man, I thought, I thought I was gonna come on tonight." And he's like, "Oh, sorry, man. These things happen. But listen, it's a good thing you didn't you didn't go on because it was a crap show anyway. Come to Armchair on Wednesday." And so I went to Armchair that way. That was a Tuesday. The
Mhm.
next day, Armchair. Went to Armchair, and he put me on. I was supposed to do 5 minutes. I did 2.5 minutes. It was fire. Everybody laughed, but like it was like proper, like everyone was laughing. It was like nice, room full. It was great. Felt alive. And then this one lady in the front was looking at me weird, like
Mm.
just not when someone's like not giving you anything. And then I started thinking about her. This is within my 2 minutes going on autopilot, doing my first set, and it's going well. I'm like, oh no, I'm saying something wrong. She hates me. And so I like literally after that like 2.5 minute laugh, I was like, thank you very much. My name is Ntobeko, and I got off stage. But like I just wanted to clip it because I'd also heard that in Joburg I'd seen comedy and I'd heard that if you're new and you feel like you're bombing, get off stage. Uh,
Hmm.
so I've seen people do like 1 minute and then it doesn't go well and then they get off stage. I mean, I wasn't bombing, I was doing really well, but I started getting nervous. I was starting
Yeah.
to sweat more, I was starting to shake. And I was like, okay, let me get out of here before I actually do start ruining things.
Yeah, that's I
Long-winded story about my first time,
no,
but
it's
yeah.
not long. It's really interesting. I mean, I, you know, started out in 2019. So shortly after that, like that was when I sent my first like DMs to comedians to like get their stories and interview them. And I've never heard yet somebody who said that their start they were interested in comedy and so originally they just staged it themselves at their flat with their friends. So that is it's really interesting to me. Yeah.
Lot better than it's a lot less embarrassing than like, you know, going out and trying it with a bunch of strangers. But interestingly enough, when I did start, I didn't tell anyone of my friends that I was starting,
Hmm.
besides Joe, who we started with. So no one in my life knew that I was doing it until literally we had a competition about maybe about 3 to 4 months. There was a jive competition, and
Hmm.
one of the requirements was to post something online, like a 2 minute clip online. And
Hmm.
so my 2 minute clip was me essentially announcing to all my friends that, okay, guys, I'm doing stand-up comedy, and also as an entry to that competition.
Yeah. 3 to 4 months is a long time. I don't think I'd be able to I don't think I would be able to keep the secret that long. I'd have to
I'm
like
really good at keeping secrets.
yeah, have some like awkward evasive like replies for what you're doing. Okay, so that's happening 2018, obviously like pre-pandemic stuff.
Yeah.
You go up, you do this 2.5 minutes, it goes really well. I mean, you do sort of like keep it close to the vest for a while. At what point did you know that this was something that you really wanted to like invest in further?
You know, to be honest with you, even at that point when I was doing like those kind of first few months, like you know when it goes well, it goes really like it feels great. And when it doesn't go well, like I had my first kind of few bombs as well, like where just no one laughed. And I'm
Mm.
obviously like writing new material all the time because I'm starting from zero. And I had an incident where like I had a joke that was quite similar to someone else's joke who was established as well. And I was like, ah. So I just kind of scrapped the whole thing and started over. So that initial 2 minutes actually like I never did it again like
Mm.
after like a first few times. But so I was doing a lot of that, and then when the jive competition happened, that was really a point for me where it's like, oh, this is like I can do this. Like maybe I'm meant to actually do this. Like because the thing is, it's tough for. I'm an artist, like in my job, I'm a creative director. I come up with stuff, you know. So it's not very different to what I do. I'm not. I mean, it's very different because one's a 9 to 5, but it's also quite similar because I get to come up with stuff. I get to brainstorm. I get to, and something comes from my brain and it ends up in real life, you know. So it's similar in that way. But when I got to stand-up comedy, it's like, okay, group work is done. It's just you standing on the stage, like real time feedback. Like if it's good, you'll know about it. If it's bad, you'll also know immediately. That made me feel like come alive. And when we did the Jive thing, like I came second in it in the competition, and part of like the finals was performing at the then Cape Town Comedy Club.
Mm.
And it was things that was happening at the same time. My career was like going really well, and the comedy like just in a very short period of time was going very well as well. And I did so and I remember like when I got through to the finals and I was supposed to perform in the finals, and it was the same night that I was meant to be in Joburg for my work. So I was staying the week in Joburg because we're doing like a project. And but one of those nights in that week, there was no way around it. One of those nights a week, I had to be like in Cape Town, but so it was a weird thing. And then I went to the producer in at Cape Town Comedy Club. I was like, listen, I'm in Joburg. How can I like, is there any way that I can do this like another night or whatever? Like, and they were like, no, sorry, if you don't come, you forfeit your chance to win. And like I'd had like really good shows, so I felt like I had, I was in it. I mean, I could maybe win, I was like I wasn't a favorite to win, but like I was, doing really well.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking to myself, look, what am I going to regret? Like not going or like there's the responsible thing to do and there's the thing that I'm going to regret. So I booked a ticket to Cape Town from Joburg because I was staying in Joburg on the company. So I booked a ticket to Cape Town and I stayed a night in Cape Town, booked a ticket first thing. So after work, the one I think it was a Friday. So after work, um I came to Cape Town, did the show, did the final, and I got through in the final. I came second, which they made up a second. There was no second. They made up a runner-up spot just so that I could, do the festival, which was the prize. And it was like amazing. Like that night was amazing. And then the next morning, I had to fly back to Joburg, like red eye, back to work. And I like it was kind of like, okay, I had to pay for that investment, but it came back so much more because basically part of the prize was performing at the Jive Funny Fest, and I performed for like 2 weeks to like hundreds of people and in like the biggest auditorium in the complex. Like it was amazing. It was like performing with Mark Lottering and like, people that were, brilliant. It was yeah, that so I mean it was like again long story, but like that those kind of decisions that kind of led me there and I'll never kind of that experience doesn't come along quickly normally.
Hmm.
I think and it doesn't come along often unless you've kind of made it, you know.
Yeah.
It was really privileged and I wasn't ready. I don't think like at 6 months I was performing at Jive. I wasn't really ready, but like I learned so much so quick about where I am and what I need to do to get to where I want.
Yeah. This podcast is, I mean, it's sort of like a platform for like I see it as one where like you sort of bring the worlds of like scholarship and art together. And
Yeah.
for me, it's there's kind of a vicarious aspect to choosing to work in this intersection because I don't actually most of the time like I did go and play things last year and I don't know, we'll see what happens this year when I come back. But like you know, without having to tell my family, I'm devoting my life to stand-up comedy. I had
Yeah.
the respectability of like being technically I'm like a graduate student, right? But then I get to like hang out and learn from people who really do make that leap into something that like when you say it out loud and you have like a creative director job at an advertising firm that, seems to have really good prospects, that can feel really scary. That can feel really, really intense, right?
Yeah, no, it is. Even now it is like because I mean I've invested a lot more into stand-up comedy in terms of my time and like as a very serious hobby, I would say. But but what I found is that I still haven't taken the leap away from advertising.
Hmm.
Because I mean I've got I don't know, it's still scary to me. It's still that like that jump needs to happen at some point, probably.
Mm.
But also, I've got the added benefit that I really like my job as well. My job is still quite interesting. Like the creative director job is also quite nice. So I'm not like slaving away at work, hating my life, you know? So so it's very scary still to jump, and I don't think I've made that jump. But what I have found was that stand-up comedy has actually helped me in my career and also given me some funny cred in my career to be like, oh, you can listen to him. He knows what's funny. We're talking about ads though. We're talking about campaigns though. But don't worry, he's a stand-up comedian. He knows what's funny. Or even if it's like, I've had a few jobs since starting stand-up comedy in advertising, and part of that leap kind of going forward is like, oh, I also do stand-up comedy, so I know the scene, I know where this brand plays, and that sort of thing. So one does kind of work on the other, but I think I'm quite aware of, at some point, I don't know, maybe it's next year, maybe it's in 10 years,
Yeah.
but at some point I think I will do that leap.
The thing that also always strikes me about stand-up comedy is like you describe it as a hobby, but that hobby is all often going to these dingy restaurants, nobody's there, you absolutely fall on your like it's very masochistic sometimes.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the road to getting better, I think people don't necessarily maybe realize always from the outset, like the only way to improve in stand-up comedy. Unlike, I mean, I think there are other creative fields where it's maybe a little bit easier to like, okay, I have something really good. And so every time I perform that thing, it's gonna get a somewhat positive reception. Like it might be very positive, it might be a little bit more muted, but like stand-up comedy is one of those knife edge things where it either really works or it just completely fails. Um,
Yeah.
so what are, I don't know, how do you navigate that, especially like as somebody who seeks out those experiences, when obviously, you could be doing something else.
Am I a masochist? No, like I think the highs of stand-up comedy are also super high. Um, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of like great, if you trying out a joke and it does well, there's very few things like it. It's amazing, and it can get to your head, and I think it does sometimes. And I think that's why you need sometimes for it to not go that well, so that you remember that like you have to put in effort into it. It's not everyone doesn't just love you, and everything that comes out of your mouth is
Mhm.
delicious the whole time. Like you actually have to think about stuff and structure stuff and all that sort of. So I think it does really balance you, but I think for me, it helped me. It sharpens. Even if stand-up comedy is like just going to dingy bars, for my whole career and never again playing a lovely theater, or traveling with it, or whatever the case. Even if it is that, it's still like such a great thing to sharpen your thinking and kind of test out ideas in real time. Like it's amazing, I think. I would recommend even everyone to try stand-up comedy just once, even if only just to respect it and respect the structure of what you put together. Because I think there's a lot of times where you can watch someone and go, it's not that funny, and you may be right, but a lot of people go from that thought to, I could do this, and you may be right, but I mean, most of the world is wrong about that. um yeah.
Yeah, so they should do it, but then they'll fall on their faces and they'll learn
No,
from that.
I think it's a learning. I mean, you have to do something you're bad at sometimes to appreciate it, I feel. I have that with gardening. Like I'm not a great gardener, but I mean I've killed so many plants, but I'm still at it and I still enjoy it. Like it's
Hmm.
it's a little bit sad when something dies, but it's also joyful when there's something lives.
Ah, that's pithy. That's lovely. Um, so okay, well, we are here because you actually are playing at a fancy theater very, very soon. You have a show at the Baxter Theatre at I think in at the end of March, if I'm not mistaken.
End of Feb, end of Feb.
End of Feb. Okay, yes, end of Feb, beginning of March.
Yeah, so
Um,
27th of Feb, 28th and 1st of March. The show is called Paranoid.
mhm.
It's my debut one-man show, and it's directed by Andi Colombo, who is a very fancy theater director, actually.
So yeah, I guess I want to ask more about how that show came about. And you can also use this. I mean, you mentioned a little while back that you grew up with stand-up comedy or you were a stand-up comedy fan. So you could talk a little bit more about also your, I don't know, what you see as your sort of personal style or what people can expect when they come to the show.
I don't know what my personal style is, honestly, but I will tell you, I think because something interesting happened when I was at Makanda, the National Arts Festival last year. I got a review when I was doing the three-man show, Proudly Problematic. I got a review. Part of my set was making people love dark comedy, something to that effect. Like, oh, he's funny, he's making people love dark comedy. I would never have guessed that I do dark comedy. So it's yeah, I'm not sure what my style is, but I will say, if you can imagine this combination on stage. I'm an aspiring theater kid. I never got to do it. And I grew up in church. I led worship for a long time at my local church. So I've got that kind of, I think, charisma. A lot of the subject matter is interesting. It's South African, and I guess it does kind of have a dark twist. A lot of the time, like I don't think I speak about what I try not to because of that thing I said earlier where I had a joke that was similar to another comic. I always I'm always aware of originality and the subject matter that everyone's talking about. And I'm always trying to go, what is true to what I know, to my personal life, just so that it can be very, very, like about me and interesting to me and therefore unique and original so that it's not close to what anybody else is doing. So when I was in triple A at college, first year in design, they told us there are some things you need to stay away from. You're not allowed to draw a skull. You're not allowed to draw a man sitting in a bench by himself. So you had to think of better images than that, better, more interesting things that people hadn't thought about that before. It took away the obvious stuff. So that's what I did when I started comedy. I honestly I just and I've never actually I've been true to this and I'm true to this in the show at the Baxter is that I've got a few things that I just struck off and I never talk about. So I don't ever mention race. Like, black people do this, white people do that. You'll never hear. I don't even say black referring to people. I don't say white referring to people. I don't say colored referring to people in my stand-up at all. Just not because I think it's bad or whatever, just because I've heard it from the greats, and I don't wanna. I don't wanna get close to that. I've heard the best jokes about it. It's fine. I want to come up with something new. Christian background. I don't swear in my real life. Like I don't use cuss words in my real life, so it's not in my stand-up either. So I want to say it's clean because the age restriction is actually non-existent, but I'm not sure. But I'm not sure because if the kids get it, it's your fault type of
Hmm.
type of comedy. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's always kind of terrible, kind of trying to explain your own comedy, but that's how I'd explain it. I think it's
Yeah.
it's a combination of those rules and those kind of structures that I play within.
Who are the comedians that you admire most or are most sort of inspired by?
Wow. It's a difficult one, but I would say admire the most. I mean, I watch Robbie Collins a lot. I've always followed him. I think he's one of the funniest people. I really like Lindy Johnson. I think she's hilarious. I admire people who seem naturally funny. Like they look like they don't work for it looks like they get on stage and just like, hey guys, and then everyone starts laughing. I think that's so like I envy it. I envy it. And I've heard somebody say that about me, and I go, "Oh wow, that's what it looks like when you work really hard." I'm trying to think. A lot of the overseas kind of comics that I really enjoyed watching, like on YouTube and stuff. Like they become writers and stop doing stand-up comedy. Like there's a comedian called Emmy Blotnick, who is the most hilarious. Like you see some of her clips on on YouTube, and she's been on one of the late night shows, and I think she writes for some of them. But you don't see her stand up anymore because they get a writing job and then kind of stop doing it. But those are I think those are probably the funniest people because they're funny, they're working at it, and before they kind of get to the Kevin Hart level, they kind of get security and get a house and that sort
Mhm.
of thing. And Gerard Carmichael, um, I really, really love his work. I think his stand-up special 8 was genius. Just like he's one of those people that just do things a little bit differently. I think that inspired me a lot, especially when I was starting out, like what kind of comic I want to be like, because I know I'm not like a ba, 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 loud kind of person, but he's such a thinking comic. I really enjoy his work.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about this show, and you mentioned it was directed by Andy Colombo, who is someone that I am hoping to have on this podcast as well. Very, very exciting and also very, very funny playwright, somebody who definitely has like a deep theater background. And I know that also your last show that you mentioned, Proudly Problematic, was also directed by Andy. So, I'm wondering what that's been like, sort of working with a director and working specifically with somebody who comes out of theater rather than, like stand-up comedy.
I've gotten a lot of advice from comedians, and I've gotten a lot of coaching like here and there from different comedians, kind of older, more experienced comedians. And often stand-up comedy is directed by other comedians because they know the vibe, they've got so I kind of understand that. The reason why we asked Andy for Probably Problematic with the two other guys, we asked Andy to direct us because she is an actual director. So she studied it, and as a playwright, she's put on shows and she's directed shows. We didn't have access to anybody else, honestly, at the time, who, has like and kind of we have access to Andy because she's my partner. So that was a great and easy kind of request. And we kind of carried on with it, and but I think the benefit of having a theater director comedy piece is that essentially comedy, even though like we test out a lot of our work in like dark clubs and like kind of not clubs, even bars. And it's often bars that people aren't really there for comedy. They kind of you're inconveniencing them, whatever.
Mm.
I think a lot of us want to actually like the goal is to play in a theater, do your own, kind of theater production and have it be of a certain standard that can travel, that can, and Andy has a lot of background and a lot of tools, which is how she kind of managed to help us shape the previous show as well. Simple things like warming up before a show. Simple things like, getting into the zone of like you're about to perform and to as deep as kind of, how to write a joke and the kind of jokes that we want to write. Because even with the previous show, there were three different comedians with three different styles and we write differently, but we managed to kind of get tools like old theater tools on how to write and how to perform and how to bring energy onto stage and when to bring energy and kind of realizing the arc of the show and looking at it, drawing it out visually, like, okay, what do you want to happen here? And then when it gets to this point, it kind of goes like this and it goes like that. And when we look at kind of stand-up comedy a lot of the time, and this is not a knock on stand-up comedians because some of the most brilliant people are untrained, but often you're learning it on the job. You're untrained, there's no school. So you have to kind of figure it out. And if someone doesn't tell you at some point, hey, this is a hour show, so you can't just go but the whole time. It has to go da 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 da. You know what I mean? Like you kind of need that. And being a theater director, Andy kind of has all those tools that that she's been able to kind of point out to us as well, like when, oh, you're trying to say this, but it's coming across as this. Which, the audience gives you that feedback, but they don't tell you what's going on. They just don't laugh when it's not working. So you need, I think, somebody to kind of direct you. And in directing my show now that I'm putting on, the show's called Paranoid, by the way. I don't know if, if I mentioned
Yeah,
that.
yeah, no, I think it's back there somewhere.
But in putting Paranoid together, that's exactly kind of the journey that we went on. It's like, what is the show about? What do you actually want to say? What is the arc of the show? How does it go? And okay, so we're going to need more material on here that speaks to this, or we're going to maybe move that material to the back here, or take that to the front, or all of that kind of stuff, and stuff that I hadn't even um thought about because I'm not somebody that had to learn how to use a mic or kind of learn to kind of figure out stage presence. Like I came in, I think quite that's why I think I was a little bit more successful early on when I shouldn't have been really. But because I kind of I was already kind of leading worship, I'm used to a stage with a lot of people, albeit not necessarily stand up. So, but even with my experience of that, I still like this year, as late as this year, been getting notes about my mic handling, and not kind of projecting right, and it's just like little habits that I've picked up along the way that now I have to kind of sort of refine more and kind of get rid of again because we're putting together like a proper theater show. So
Yeah.
it really makes like she 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 she's really good at expanding and asking the right questions um
Hmm.
about the show so that I can think about the right things and write the right things and perform the right things.
Your answer is a great lead in to sort of a little bit later. I mean, talking about needing to draw on the expertise of another discipline or another field to kind of improve your own craft. That's something that obviously informs this project as well a little bit. One of the things that I like to do for this podcast is have someone bring in an object that's meaningful to them, that connects them to the past. Because I'm a historian, I'm very biased towards thinking about memories and the past and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I think this is a good time to segue into what you've brought us today.
Okay, so what I brought, I'm gonna slide it over. Oh no, no, it's too low. This is it's the vine of a sweet potato. It's a sweet potato vine. The leaves are edible. So when I was growing up in Durban, as a kid, my mom used to. We had like a little bit of a nice backyard, and she'd plant all sorts of like whether it's mealies or that sort of thing. So were quite familiar with manure and like being outside and dirty and that sort of stuff. And I think I've lost it coming to Cape Town and being in very like concrete environments, and I'm trying to get back there. And this is kind of a reminder of that. There's a dish in Durban called imfino, that I grew up with, which is essentially some wild greens that you kind of make into uh, shebo. I don't know what a shebo is, but it's a curry for lack of better
Mhm.
explanation. It, think of a curry, but it's green. Um, so there's that dish that I grew up with, and I didn't know that I could actually put it together in Cape Town because I don't know the different greens in Cape Town, and like you don't want to eat something that's poisonous, and so I never actually ventured out. And me and my nephew that I live with, we recently discovered that the leaves of sweet potato actually form part of imvino. And so we've been like I've got like a nice vine going of it, and we kind of are incorporating it so much more now into our food, and it's such a great reminder of both of us actually of like rural KZN and like going back to Durban and kind of growing up. That's my connection to my past, which is I try to keep quite close because it's such a reminder that like there's food outside, and you can just grow it like
Yeah.
just and it's super therapeutic to do as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
When we were growing up, it's almost like it's not like the fancy food, right? Because it's like right there in your yard. It's not like it's almost like a sign of like, oh, you couldn't afford to go to the shop and get
Hmm.
something. But now it's something that we crave. because we just don't have it that much anymore. And something that every time I visit home, I like, oh, can we have some of that? It's yeah.
Yeah. I want to do maybe sort of a daring segue here, but
Oh,
one of the questions that I sent you beforehand is, it was a very selfish question. It's like sort of like, how do you feel yourself to be connected, or what aspects of the South African past do you wish people were more aware of? Which is a very like history person question. I think, it has a smell of graduate school around it, which I don't really like. But it occurs to me that the show is called Paranoid, and a lot of the bits that you've done, I know
no,
on
but it's paranoid, not
exactly.
paranoid.
No, that's what I'm saying. A paranoid,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
A lot of the, like content that you've done on, I think, TikTok and Instagram have been riffing on this concept of a para.
yeah.
And that's like I mean, you can explain that term, I think, in your own words. To me, it means like a just somebody on the street, like a bergi almost. I don't know.
Para is a word that we use in South Africa for people who are addicted to the wrong drugs. The
Mm.
plain where it's somebody who is perpetually high. Like so, that's why part of the joke is that they're always high. They're parachute. Even when they come down, they paraglide. It's you know that person in South Africa, they parking your cars and then asking for change.
Mhm.
They're kind of in your face about kind of needing stuff, but never really kind of perpetually high,
Yeah.
essentially. It's
So,
it's it's what happens. Sorry, on a more serious note, that is not. It's often what happens when people are um, either like kind of misunderstood on a particular kind of I guess maybe an autism spectrum, or just kind of struggling with substance abuse, and then can never kind of don't have the means to get themselves turned around, or the support to get themselves turned around. They just kind of end up in
mm.
in the streets, and then the cycle perpetuates itself.
So I mean, obviously, like I think it's such an incredible encapsulation of a lot of like what it's like to be kind of a working in comedy in a South African space where a lot of humor inherently, I mean, like you talk about making a conscious effort not
To avoid stereotypes,
to avoid
essentially.
stereotypes. Yeah. But then, when you engage with the realities that people are observing and thinking about, like they're often very dark ones. That's just what I'm sort of trying to draw out here, right? Is like you can't really produce, or it's very difficult, I think, to produce comedy in South Africa without engaging with that or coming across that or having to navigate that in some way. And for me, that's also a tie to the past because a lot of that stuff is, related to just the way that South Africa developed and shook out over centuries and decades. So I don't know. Is that something that you think about when you are writing comedy, thinking about your own development as a comedian? Is that a source of reflection for you?
Oh, so much. I think about it all the time, Robin. I wish I think about it all the time, and I wish more I wish I could have more discussions about it in the comedy space, honestly, because I think growing I've always grown up with the knowledge that words are powerful. Like words, you kind of speak things into being, and what we repeat, we kind of become. Um, and so when I'm talking about like omitting kind of certain signifiers of kind of where we are, the joke about it is that actually a lot of my comedy is about Black people and white people, actually.
Hmm.
And I just leave it in your head. I just don't say it. It's about class, and class in South Africa is really along racial lines, still for the most part. It's about geography, like growing up in a suburb versus growing up in a township. It's on racial lines. So if I say, if I talk about my friend who grew up in a township with me, you can already picture that
Hmm.
he's black.
Yeah.
If I talk about an encounter I have in a suburb, you can picture that that person is white. That's the dynamic of South Africa. So I think that's the fun part for me, is knowing I'm doing it, and it's almost a challenge of non-racialism, which
Hmm.
it's not a concept that exists. Like, you can't be non-race. Like, we've built the structures of race, so you can't just, unless you dismantle it, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. Even if you don't say the words, it's in everything. And your question around like the history of South Africa and how we kind of navigate, or what people need to know. For me, it's hilarious in South Africa because we're so advanced in race relations, right? Like,
Hmm.
in academically, at least. Um, we're so advanced in thinking, and even our constitution is like amazing. We've had so many good conversations. Like, we had a whole Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is, I mean, one of the most beautiful things to ever come out of apartheid, which was
Hmm.
so violent. Um, but we're almost like, with the rise of, like, the right wing kind of thing, even in South Africa, we're kind of regressing in popular culture a little bit. Like, we're talking about, oh no, it's over now. Why you kind of bring stuff like that up? But we forget that there are literal physical structures that were built that were not dismantled by apartheid. Like, the geography of South Africa is, I mean, it's still the most unequal society in the world. Yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, we're still, like, part of the shows, and like, I mentioned these kind of things, and like how we understand safety. You know what I mean? Like, um, is that's why we're paranoid. Like, we're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
we understand safety different to the rest of the world. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you think about South Africa, if you consider South Africa, because we've got so much crime, most of our suburbs have barbed wire. They've got
Mm.
electric fencing, and it's so normal for us until you travel to another, like, country, and you're like, wait, the security, where's your? How come? How do you stop burglars? No, everyone doesn't live in fear like that. And because we're
Yeah.
the most, unequal society in the world. And for me, I'm passionate more about it because I'm obviously of the other class, the lower class, that which means I know both sides. I know both worlds. Like, I grew up in a township and I live in a suburb, so I know what it's like to live in a township. So, like, most of my family lives in a township. But I also know what it's like to live in a suburb, and I also have the fears of living in a suburb, and the benefits of living in a suburb, and the pretentiousness of living in a suburb. I have it too, So it's very personal for me. It's very interesting to me, like, because probably the thing that affected me. I mean, I can't say, I don't know what, but one of the things that affected me the most from the past is um, something like the Group Areas Act, or apartheid spatial planning, because it meant that I grew up in a township. It meant that there are certain resources and conveniences, and the world, that I only learned later in life.
Yeah.
And not that but excuse me, there's so much stuff that I had to reach out and try and find for myself, as opposed to just things that are. And that's the South African experience. That is the, like, I grew up also, like, because like, going to multiracial schools and stuff, like, everyone tells you, travel. That's how you learn the world. Like, travel. You'll kind of, you'll get you'll get to know yourself as well. You'll get to know that you don't live in a little bubble and whatever. But for Black South Africans, most of the time, because we live in two different worlds, we live in the world we grew up in and the world that we work in, and they are stark difference between those. We already That's traveling. It's
Yeah.
Your persona is different at home, and not just in a home environment, but like in the area that you live. versus the where you work or where you now live. But the interesting thing growing up for especially for a black child is like those ideas form so early, and as you grow, you have to grapple with them, unlearn them as well, in a certain thing because of the way the structure is. White is rich, black is poor. So you're like, oh, I want to be that. Oh, so you have to, like, when you kind of get a little bit conscious, go, oh, the only reason I'm associating whiteness with good. I'm associating blackness with stealing. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
you kind of have to realize that even the work of apartheid is still, that's what I'm saying, it's still structural. So you have to discover it again and go, oh, flip, I'm in that trap
Yeah.
again.
That's why I really love stand-up comedy, and why I've been so fascinated with humor and satire in general, because it brings a lot of those conversations into the open, whether or not you're explicitly mentioning race. Like, exactly as you said, you are engaging with it, and you're engaging with like that logic, I guess.
Yeah. And the funny thing with stand up, I think, is that it's I guess it's like writing. You can't fake it. You
Hmm.
can't fake what you know. You can't um you can't pretend to know something you don't. So when you get on stage, like I quite, it's part of what I enjoy about stand-up comedy is that you get to know a person, because whether or not that's who they really are, it shows. Whether or not they put on that persona or whatever, you can kind of see, okay, that's their mask. That's kind of who they are when you kind of see it live. It's really fascinating as a study in people.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really interesting to hear about your own journey, and obviously making some very, very big moves with this Baxter Theatre thing. So, where can people get information and tickets to this show, and when are the dates again?
So the show Paranoid, it's at Baxter Theatre, 27th of Feb, 28th of Feb, and 1st of March. So from 27th to the 1st of March. And you can get, I guess, more info on the Baxter Theatre website. I think it's baxtertheatre.coza or baxter.coza, .co.za. Realize I'm speaking to an American. Um, uh, and if you want to know a little bit more about me, I think probably the best place is my Instagram. It's got some links to other places, but my Instagram is probably where I am the most. And in terms of contacting me as well, my Instagram is where you'll find me. My Instagram is Pupemini, but it's a Zulu word that means daydreamer. Um, so, but it also does have my name on it. So if you just kind of Google Ntobeko Ximba Instagram, you'll click to the right one. Yeah. If
Oh,
anybody's watching, listening, buy a ticket to this one at the Baxter. It's never gonna be like this again. So
all right. Very, very exciting. Have a wonderful, wonderful day in Ntobeko.
you too, man. Thank you so much for the chat.